And I'd also like to thank my parents for being here and my dear friends. And a special shout out to my high school English teacher, Mr. Oxenham, for being here with us today. It really means so much to me to have you here.
So when I woke up in the morning, the bed sheet would be stuck to my leg, and I'd have to spend the first couple of minutes gathering the courage to rip it off quickly so I didn't prolong the pain. But my mother, to try and kind of rescue me from that, often she would hold my hands as I was drifting off to sleep. And often when I woke up in the morning, she would still be holding onto my hands with her head on the bed, having slept there. And it's become quite a powerful memory for me recently because we now have 2 young daughters and our youngest also has eczema. And when I can hear her in her room scratching in the middle of the night, I will try and go to her room and hold onto her hands, and it always fills me with admiration for my own mum because it takes so much stamina in the middle of the night to do that.
My mother's from the Philippines. She was born and raised there. And then she met my father at a conference in New Delhi. I don't even know. My father's not Indian. He's from Malaysia. He's Malay. They met at a conference in New Delhi, proceeded to correspond by aerogram for 2 years until Dad apparently got on a plane to Manila and said, either you marry me or we're no longer friends. And he didn't even have a wedding ring. He had to borrow his friend's ring. So anyways, she decided to say yes. And then she did. They had a civil registration, which I'll tell you what happened later. But they got on the plane, came to Malaysia, and she said, my first impression of this country was, oh my God, it's a jungle. And I never understood it until I realized, and someone told me that at the time, in the 60s, Manila was a huge sprawling metropolis compared to Kuala Lumpur, which is a tiny town. So she's like, oh my God, I've regressed. Anyways.
So, and she made a plan, like actually before my oldest brother was born, she had already planned, that she was going to teach him to read by the age of 2. She was just driven. And when I think about the extent to which she, implemented this plan, like really, I had at the age of 5, I had a timetable, she drew it out for me, what I should be doing from, you get home from school, you have this much time to have a snack, then you take your shower, I had playtime. It was not,
This is Temple Alley Summer. This is a fantasy novel for the middle grades and up, and it's got multiple layers. You can almost see them from the cover itself. In the front, you see a girl in contemporary Japan with her randoseru backpack on in an alleyway. With some potted plants around and so on. And clear in the back, the bricks might obscure this a little bit here in this space, but if you squint, perhaps you can see a witch on her broom and a castle. So the main or outer story in Temple Alley Summer unfolds in a regional city in Japan, and the inner story unfolds in a fantasy kingdom.
俺は非常手段を取ることにした。窓を開けたわけだ。小雨が降っている。ちょうどよかった。窓から屋根におしっこをしても雨が流してくれるはずだ。初めてじゃない。たまにする。特に冬。冬は寒くてトイレまで行く間に体は冷えるわ。眠気まで飛んでしまう。この窓は中庭に向いた裏側だ。誰からも見えやしない。あ、去年の冬は屋根の雪におしっこの跡が残って母さんに見つかったけど、何度にあんたが赤ん坊の頃に使ったアヒルの丸があるわよ。母さんは怖い顔でそう言った。そんなもの使えるわけないだろう。もうしないからって許してもらったけど、見つからなきゃいいわけだ。今日は大丈夫だ。音はするけど、雨の音に混じって下の部屋で寝ている母さんたちに聞こえるはずはない。ジョロジョロという音と一緒に体中の緊張がやわやわとほどけていく。あーってため息と一緒に声が出そうだった。ガタ。
Time for emergency measures. I opened the window. A light rain was falling. Perfect. If I peed on the roof from the open window, the rain would wash away the evidence. It was hardly the first time I'd done this. I pee out the window every once in a while, especially in winter when I get so cold going down to the bathroom that it's impossible to fall back asleep. My window opens onto the courtyard, so nobody sees me. But there was that time last window when Mom saw evidence of my pee in the snow on the roof. We still have your ducky potty from when you were a baby, she said, glowering. I will not use the ducky potty. I told Mom I would never pee out the window again, and she calmed down. Now I just avoid getting caught. This time everything went smoothly. My pee made a sound, but it was masked by the rain, so there was no chance of my parents hearing anything as they slept downstairs. Joro joro. As the pee left me, the tension drained from every part of my body. I exhaled so deeply I almost sighed out loud. Then I heard a noise below. Crash!
Struggled to learn how to read. And, my family, they're book people. We never had any money, but we did have a lot of books and library cards. So there was definitely a culture of reading. I struggled to learn to read starting when I was 4 or 5. I didn't read very fluently until I was 8. And I remember a feeling, it was almost like a switch going off, of just struggling and struggling and struggling through incredibly boring primary readers. And then all of a sudden just understanding it. And so I went from the primary readers to Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I will never reread because I have these wonderful early childhood memories of the book that I don't want to be spoiled. And then after that, I read constantly. I have no formal training as a writer, but I've been reading all my life, and that has been my education in many ways.
And the challenge is to put in your mind a set of characters and concentrate on them and have them in your brain all day long, no matter what you're doing. A lot of people here are bankers or consultants or whatever you're doing. And they have to stay in your mind, and that's part of your brain that holds them all day long until you get back and are able to read again. And I think one of the challenges in society is to read for half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour a day is what you need to do, I think, to probably be a good reader or get through what you want to get through. And but the beauty of it is actually the other 23 hours, or not maybe when you're sleeping, but when you're awake, that you still have those characters and you're still waiting to see what happens to them. And that is extremely special. And I would argue maybe more special when you have another job that's keeping you busy doing whatever we do, which is not that valuable, but the reading is valuable.
Is that, for me, one of the happiest developments of my reading life is that in the last 40 years, we all know so much of the best writing in English literature doesn't come from England or the US. It's coming from Hong Kong and India and Pakistan and Sri Lanka and Japan and Nigeria and the Caribbean and Canada. And I think it's thrown open the doors and windows of our imagination and literature to admit new stories, new ways of telling stories, new rhythms. And I think literature is much more interesting now than when I spent 8 years studying it.
So Eurasians, as in people of mixed European and Asian descent who grew up from the colonial experience, existed in most countries that were colonized by Europeans, especially the British, but also the French and the Dutch. And you had Eurasian groups in all of these countries, but their experiences were all slightly different. So this is a portrait of a Eurasian family in Singapore, and this is an Anglo-Burman or Burmese Eurasian family in Burma. This is William Henry Pratt, better known to the world as Boris Karloff, who was a towering film star of the early 20th century. The most famous horror film star, arguably. And he was from an Anglo-Indian family, though the youngest of his brothers, was actually born in London. So he was the most British of these Anglo-Indian brothers. But both parents were Anglo-Indians. And his elder brother here is Sir John Pratt, who was the British Consul General in Shanghai. So although the situation for people who are mixed race was very different between America and Britain and the British Empire, and it was quite different between the situation in India and the situation in Britain itself, still it was surprising how successful this family was, despite being mixed in a British context, because his brother Richard Septimus Pratt was also one of the British consuls in Asia. So it's interesting that this family, by serving in the diplomatic service in China, could be seen to represent Britishness despite being mixed. And one of the Chinese staff in the embassy referred to Sir John's brother as the Black Consul. So here's the really super famous films that made Boris Karloff's name. Frankenstein, which took 5 hours of painful makeup and another even more painful hour and a half to take it off every day. And Imhotep in The Mummy. So these films were from the early 30s, from 1931 and 1932, and they were really his breakout roles after working very hard, working odd jobs, not just film jobs, in Canada and up and down the US West Coast. So this is a picture of the brothers, the Pratt brothers, when they're all together in London after the filming of Boris Karloff's first British film, coming back to the UK after a long time in Hollywood. He filmed The Ghoul, so he met up with his...
So what works quite well, so on the left page in the book we have the haiku, on the right page you have the cat. When you flip through the book, you tend to look at the photo first, and then you might read the haiku and see some things in there and go back to the photo. So I think it works really well as a kind of a combination to go deeper into the photo. When you're a cat person, you like all cats, generally. When you're a dog person, you might be a Rottweiler person, or or you might like 3 or 4 breeds and not the other ones, or people that like big dogs think that small dogs are stupid, and maybe the other way around.
Yeah. Uncharted waters. Words, obscure creatures of the deep sea, ghostly, translucent, writing, make my dinghy. I grip vowels by their hoops, or stiff rods, ribbons of gluey algae sticking to the roof of my mouth. I grab consonants by their hooks, multiplying shoots of Posidonia oceanica with its free-floating fruits. Adjectives are still unknown in the hundreds. An abysmal abyss, the Hadal zone. I hang on to floats, safe verbs, prepositions, sometimes nouns, couched in modest tones, coiled to craft a raft of my own when the wind abandons uncharted waters.
I
have cheeks.
I
have cheeks, just needing a kiss. I have lips, just needing to kiss.
但任我的面頰如何遷就，任我的嘴唇如何追殺。
But no matter how my cheeks oblige, no matter how my lips persist.
我的頭，讓我轉動的頭如何飛快，任他們本來如何接近。
No matter how fast my head spins round, no matter how close they are to each other.
What is wrong with me, Beatrice? I still confuse soy, which means I am, and estoy, which means I am. To better remember the rule, I type this note. Soy is for the permanent condition, but the iPhone auto-translate function turns it into soy sauce is for the permanent condition. Soy confundido. No, Beatrice corrects me. Estoy confundido. Soy es para la condición permanente, estoy es para la condición temporal. But Beatrice, what if I am always confused?